Welcome. This is All I Know About Semantics. Today we'll be looking at semantic features, semantic roles, and lexical relations. First things first, let's talk about what semantics is. Let's get a definition. Well, semantics is a branch of linguistics that is concerned with the study of meaning, the meaning of words, phrases, and sentences that we utter. And speaking of meaning, we can identify two different types of meaning. First of all, we have conceptual meaning, which is related to the basic essential components or elements of meaning that are conveyed by the literal use of the word. While associative meaning is related to the different connotations or associations that each person gives to words, and they obviously may differ from one person to the other. So if we had to summarize this, we would say that conceptual meaning is related to the literal use of a word, while associative meaning is a more subjective field. For the sake of this video, because we are analyzing only semantics, we will focus on conceptual meaning. So let's move on to semantic features. There are three ways in which we can approach words, in which we can think of words, according to semantics. One of them is thinking of words as containers that store elements of meaning inside of them. Those elements are what we will call semantic features. And to understand this concept better, we will be analyzing this very common sentence in linguistics, especially semantics: colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Now, if we analyze this sentence from a grammatical point of view or a syntactical point of view, we will get to the conclusion that this sentence is correct, that it's completely fine, because the structure is good. We have a noun phrase made up by two modifiers and a head, which is functioning as a subject, and a verb phrase, which is functioning as a predicate, of which sleep is the head or the main verb. But if anyone who knows anything about English reads this sentence, they will immediately realize that there is something wrong here, that there is something odd. And there are many things that are odd in this sentence because everything crashes, every word crashes with each other. But for the sake of this video, we will analyze only these most important content words: ideas and sleep. So here we have them isolated. Ideas is a noun, and sleep is a verb. So according to what we know about syntax, we will know that ideas, being a noun, should be able to function as subject to this action, to this verb, sleep. But semantically, that is not possible. So the question that we could ask here is, what is it that makes ideas not able to perform the action that this verb describes? And the answer is, we can find in analyzing words that are indeed able to perform this action. One of them, for example, could be girl, and another one could be dog. Girls and dogs are both able to sleep. What is it what's the difference between girl or dog and ideas? Let's see. They are all common nouns. Then we can see that girl is human and ideas is not. That's a difference. But ideas is negative human. But dog is also negative human. So that cannot be what we're looking for right now. Let's analyze another semantic feature of these words. That is that girl is an animate being. And so is dog. While ideas is negative animate. This is the factor that determines whether this noun is able to sleep or not. Another approach towards that semantics deals with is that of semantic roles. While the analysis of semantic features takes into account the inherent qualities of words, semantic roles looks at how they interact with each other within a situation. Some of the possible roles that words fulfill in a sentence or a situation are those of agent, theme, instrument, experiencer, location, source, and goal. Let's study them in detail. Agent could be defined as the entity that performs the action described in the situation. Theme, which is also called patient, is the entity that is involved or affected by the situation, by the action. Instrument is the entity used by the agent to perform the action. To understand what the experiencer, what the role of the experiencer fulfills, is we need to think of those verbs that do not actually describe an action and more of an experience. Verbs such as see, to be, or to hear would fall into this category. So here, an experiencer is an entity which is typically human that experiences something. The next one we have here is location, and it is where, it could be defined as where the entity is. Following is source, and along with goal, these appear when the action described in the situation is involves some kind of movement. So source is where the entity, where a given entity is from or moves from. And the goal is where this entity moves to. To understand this clearly, let's analyze this example. Mary saw a fly on the wall. She borrowed the magazine from George. She squashed the bag with it. She handed the magazine back to him. Gee, thanks, said George. Let's analyze these entities or these words one by one. Mary here is doing somehow this action. So that, as we could see in the previous slide, is an experience. So Mary here is the experiencer. A fly is the theme in this situation. On the wall is the location. She, which is a pronoun that is referring to Mary, is not the experiencer here, but the agent. A magazine, here, magazine is the theme from George. George is the source in this situation. And as we can see, George is not a physical location, it's not a place, it's not a city, it's not a building, and it's a person. And as we can notice here, George is a person, not a physical location. That's why I said that source, goal, or location are not necessarily fulfilled by something that we will technically identify as a place or a location. She squashed the bug with it. She, again, is referring to Mary, is again the agent. The bug is a theme with it. It is referring to the magazine, and here it's not working as a theme, but it's working as the instrument. She handed the magazine back to him. She is again the agent. The magazine here is once again the theme, back to him, back to George, which is now functioning as the goal instead of the source. Finally, gee, thanks, said George. George is the agent in this situation. This example was proposed by Joule in his book, The Study of Language, and it's brilliant because it shows very clearly and in a simple way how the same word or the same idea, because we have pronouns replacing words in some places, but it's the same idea, you know, that Mary and she is the same, or magazine and it, or George and him, or bug and fly. They are all the same idea, the same concept, or the same lexical item, but they're working, and even if they all mean the same, they have the same semantic features. Depending on depending on the words that surround them in the context of this situation, of this sentence, they behave differently. The last approach to words that semantics deals with, that we will look at today, is that of lexical relations. Here we're not looking at how words interact with each other within the context of a certain situation, and instead we will be focusing on the way words relate to other words in the whole lexicon of a language. The first lexical relation we'll look at today is synonymy. Synonyms are words with very closely related meaning. Now, many people and in many contexts, synonyms can replace each other without major consequences. However, it is important that we remember that they are not exactly the same, and we shouldn't expect total sameness from synonyms. They are different words and have slightly different meanings. One of the key differences, for example, is the register. And we could analyze this example. The words dad and father are very similar, but they are not the same. When one person is talking about their dad or their father, they're probably referring to the same person. However, dad is a word that will be used in an informal context, and father with a more but more formality is required. Moving on to the next lexical relation, we have antonymy. Antonyms are words with opposite meanings. But it's not that simple, because we can identify different types of antonyms. First of all, we have gradables. Gradables. These are opposites along a scale. We could take, for example, old and young. And let's analyze a sentence. Let's suppose that my dog is 5 years old. And I could say, my dog is not young. Now, this is important for gradable antonyms. They allow, these are the characteristics of gradable antonyms. In the first place, we can see that the negative of one, the negation of one, does not imply the other, does not necessarily imply the other. So if I'm saying that my dog is not young, I am not necessarily saying that my dog is old. I'm just saying that in this case, my dog is just middle-aged. The other characteristic of gradable antonyms is that they allow comparative constructions. So I could say, for example, my dog is not young, but he's younger than my cat. Now, the other type of antonyms are non-gradables. These don't allow comparative constructions, and the negative of one necessarily implies the other. One clear example of this could be dead and alive. I forgot to mention that these non-gradable antonyms are also called complementary pairs. Going back to the dead or alive example, I can say, for example, she is not dead, which means indeed that she is alive. So the negative of one does indeed imply the other. And the last type of antonyms we will analyze today is reversives. This applies mostly to verbs that do the opposite of their pair. So examples could be enter, exit, or pack, unpack. Then we have hyponymy. And the definition for this is that the meaning of one form is implied or included in the meaning of another. And this is because of a hierarchical relationship. Let's analyze this with an example. If we're asked to explain the meaning of rose, we will probably say that it's a type of flower. And we can do the same for flower. If we're asked to define it, we could say that it's a type of plant. But flower is not the only type of plant. There are also vegetables and trees, for example. Here we have a hierarchical relationship. Rose is a hyponym to flower. And flower is the superordinate for rose. Now, vegetables, flower, and trees are all co-hyponyms. Co-hyponyms to their superordinate plant. This is how this hierarchical relationship is established. Now, remember this graphic for the next slide, because now we will be analyzing prototypes. To understand prototypes, I would like you to think about a flower. Odds are that you're probably thinking about something like this. Flower with many white petals and a yellow center, and a thin, tall stem, and a thin, tall green stem. This is what we will call a daisy. And this just illustrates the meaning of prototypes. They are the most characteristic instance of a certain category. Daisies are the prototypes for flowers. Robins are the prototypes for birds. And are the prototypes for birds. And hammers are the prototypes for tools. This idea of the prototype is very useful when it comes to having to decide whether to include a word in a certain category. For example, if you saw a canary or a dove, you think that they look quite like robins, and therefore you will identify them as birds. However, if you look at a penguin, you would start to doubt it because they do not share many characteristics in common with this prototype. Moving on to the next lexical relation we have to analyze today, we have homophones. Moving on to the next lexical relation, we have homophones, which could be defined as different written forms that have the same pronunciation. One example of this could be continuing with the flower examples that we've been using in the previous slides. We can say flower as the plant that looks like a daisy, or flour as in the ingredient we use to make cookies. That is basically what homophones are. Next up, we have homonyms. This could be described as one form, written or spoken, that has two or more unrelated meanings. What form? That has two or more unrelated meanings. The unrelated part is important. Unrelated meanings. So one example of this could be, bank as the institution that has to do with money, or bank as the side of a river. Completely different words as regards meaning that have the same written and spoken form. Another important lexical relation is that of polysemy, which is what happens when one form, written or spoken, has multiple meanings that are all related by extension. When I was researching for this video, I looked up the word head in my dictionary, and under the noun head, there were 52 entries. And all of them are related because all of them have something in common. I'll mention some examples so we can see. One of them is that head as the top of the body. The person in charge of a company or an organization on it. The side of a coin that has the picture of a person's head printed on it. Or the froth on top of a beer. As we can see, all of these share the same idea in common, that is related to the position of the head towards the body. That's why we will call this word polysemous instead of homonymous. Lastly, let's analyze the relationship of metonymy. This is a relationship based on a close connection on real life experience. Or in everyday experience. Three very common cases of metonymy are those of container content, whole or part, whole and part, and representative and symbol. And let's see examples for each of them. When you say that the baby drank the whole bottle, you don't mean that the baby has drunk the bottle itself, but the milk that was contained in it. In the same way, when you say that you're grateful for the roof over your head, you don't necessarily mean that you're only grateful for the roof and not for the walls. You're saying that you're grateful that you live in a house. And representative symbol, a very common example is that of the government buildings, like Buckingham Palace or the White House. And in the case that the picture shows, we can say Downing Street decided to carry on with the plan. This doesn't mean that Downing Street itself decided, because it's not an animate being and it's not able to take a decision. What we're actually talking about is the people who live or work there. They are the ones that took the decision. But due to their close connection in everyday experience, or this case of metonymy, this sentences like these are completely acceptable and will be understood by the people we are talking to, no matter how odd they seem if you don't know, no matter how odd they seem if you analyze, for example, only their semantic features. And that is because of the lexical relation these items hold with each other. That's all for today, and thank you for watching.